Reflections from Torch Trust, focusing on Christian faith and sight loss.
Hello and a warm welcome to Reflections, the show from Torch Trust that focuses on faith and disability in today's world. I'm your host, Marilyn Baker, and we've got a great show lined up for you today. First, let's get started with a song. This is one I recorded, written by a friend I met when I was at the Royal College of Music, who first inspired me to write songs. It's called I Know Where You're Coming From.
Maybe it looks like a pace or two, but to someone it could feel like a mile. Many a secret battle in life has been hidden behind a smile. People judge so easily the surface things they see, but the Spirit of God searches for truth and sees things differently. Maybe it looks like an hour's work, but to some it could have taken years. Many a simple task in life has been crippled by doubts and fears. People judge so easily the surface things they see, but the Spirit of God searches for truth and sees things differently. So I'll lead you when you need to be led, and I'll feed you when you need to be fed, and I'll heal you when you're broken inside, so you don't have to hide, 'cause I love you. I know where you're coming from. I know where you've been. I know the whole world loves a winner, but I still love you if you fail to win. Anyone can love a superstar who learns to play the part, but I'd rather have a poor man who opens up his heart. I'm sick of human cruelty and mindless empty talk. The world thinks that it's grown to maturity, but it can hardly even walk. Judging things so quickly by the surface things they see, but the Spirit of God loves mercy and sees things differently. So I'll hear you when you call out my name. I'll be with you when you're feeling in pain, and I'll come to you when you are crying, 'cause I see you are trying, and I love you. I know where you're coming from. I know where you've been. I know the whole world loves a winner, but I still love you if you fail to win. Anyone can love a superstar who learns to play the part, but I'd rather have a poor man who opens up his heart. Give me a poor man any day who opens up his heart.
A couple of weeks ago we heard from Julia Chapman, who started losing her sight in middle age. Well, today our guest is someone who lost their sight quite a bit earlier, as a young person actually, and she's here to share her story. Ella Abel spoke with our reporter Lynn Davies.
Can you share a little bit about your story and kind of how your sight loss came about?
Sure. So it was a couple of years ago that I lost my sight completely unexpectedly. There's no family history of it. I didn't have any other conditions that would mean that sight loss was something that I would expect to happen. So when I first started losing my sight, I barely even registered it as happening because it happened gradually over a process of months. At first, it was things like, oh, I couldn't tell the difference between green and red anymore. And then it was things would look fuzzy for a while, particularly when I was driving, and then suddenly my sight would clear up. But it got to the point where I was struggling to read like numbers on my laptop, and that was a point I went to my optician, who was like, you really shouldn't be driving. And hearing that was a massive shock because where I live, if you don't have a car to get around, you're stuck. And after that, it was just really, really terrifying. I think if I could sum up what losing sight loss is like at my age, it's about as bad as everyone fears it to be. I can't recognize people anymore. I can't see the faces of the people I love. I can't read unless the letters are absolutely giant, so that I lose any kind of sense of scale or relationship between words. And as someone who, like, I once read 3 books in one night. That's how much of a reader I was. And now my books are just ornaments on my shelf. They're not things that I can engage with. So the actual experience of being blind is terrifying. But then the devastation that I felt is only in some ways a small part of it. It's devastated my family too. And then my interactions with people have completely changed. I'm no longer considered an autonomous person anymore just because I carry a cane. I've had things from people dragging me across the street without my permission to the assumptions, the fears that people have about sight loss are things that they are suddenly very confident in sharing with me when I'm just going about my day. And that's really unpleasant, having suddenly no boundaries, having been someone who was previously, like anyone else, an independent, confident person.
Yeah, I can really imagine and empathize with that actually, because, well, as somebody who has been blind all my life, I have only known that world, and I have only known people to be a certain way. I think because I haven't had sight, I'm a bit ignorant to people's fears, in a sense that, I don't get why people have fears. For me, I get why somebody has fears, like, for example, you are explaining about sight loss, and this is like the worst that it could be. I totally do get that. And it's quite crazy, isn't it, how people just perceive you differently almost from one day to the next, just because now you can't, as you say, you can't drive, you can't read in the same way that you used to read before. And yeah, I can just imagine how devastating that is. So how did you sort of keep yourself in this? Because, of course, I can imagine the experience changing you in many ways, but you're still the same person as you were before in many ways. Like, the essence of you is still the same. So how did you keep that through your sight loss journey?
It's something I don't think I've completely figured out, but there are elements to me that I have to continue doing. So even though I have sight loss, I am still a visual person. I have a background in design, and finding that I couldn't create my own clothes anymore was really awful. So I had to sort of pivot and think, what can I do that will still allow me to be creative? And that's when I picked up painting. And it's actually been through painting that I've figured out how to use my residual vision as effectively as I can. And I've also met wonderful, wonderful people, artists, who don't approach me with assumptions. The first thing they know about me is that I'm an artist like them. And my sight loss is just one thing of many to know about me, rather than something that they see as holding me back. Because in their eyes, they can look at my art and they don't perceive me as a person who is always struggling, which I'm not. I'm not. The thing about sight loss or any other disability really is that it just means you need help with certain things. That's kind of it a lot of the time. And everyone needs help with things. I think it's just because the thing I need help with is so very visible because I carry a cane. That's kind of a target for a lot of assumptions. And things I've done to kind of maintain my autonomy and my independence. So I love walking around places. I love taking taxis. I especially love going to London because in London I can take public transport with ease because the help that is offered is there for everybody. So it doesn't make me feel like I'm somehow lesser by needing help.
The interview we're hearing this week was originally featured on Torch's podcast series Insights. So if you're enjoying it and you'd like to hear more of this sort of content, the complete catalogue of Insight shows is available to listen to now. Just head to torchtrust.org, click Living with Sight Loss in the top menu and select Radio and Podcasts from the drop-down menu. We'll be hearing more from Ella in a few minutes, but now it's time for our thought for the week. This week's thought is by James Brookman, who feels the need to phone a friend.
The phrase phone a friend has taken on extra meaning if you watch Who Wants to Be a Millionaire on TV. But do you have a friend you can call on in times of trouble? Well, I do. He's called John, and I have his number on speed dial on my phone. He's my equivalent of the AA's fourth emergency service. Someone to call when you're in trouble because you know they're wise, contactable 24 hours a day, and will move heaven and earth to help you. I nearly had to call John out the other night. After a party, I got my car stuck in a muddy field. There I was, wearing my dinner jacket, standing ankle deep in muddy water, with 5 relatives in a nearby house awaiting their lift home. But I decided I couldn't call John, not at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I did the next best thing. Or maybe it should have been the first thing. I called Jesus. That reminds me of a time in the Bible when someone else called on Jesus at a party.
On the 3rd day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother, Mary, was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him,
"They have no more wine."
Jesus replied,
"Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come."
Mary said to the servants,
"Do whatever he tells you."
This is a story which goes on to Jesus performing his first miracle and changing water into wine. But it's Mary's response to the problem that I want to think about. She didn't know at this stage that Jesus could perform miracles, yet she turned to him in her difficulty. What she did know was that Jesus was wise and would move heaven and earth to help her. After my prayer in the field, Jesus didn't perform any obvious miracle like turning water into wine. But within minutes, someone arrived with a tow rope, and then someone else came along who knew that the catering manager at the party owned a pickup truck, and a few minutes later, my car was being dragged out of the mire.
Now it's time to head back to Lynn and Ella's chat.
Do you find that people who knew you when you were fully sighted, do they treat you differently to people who met you after you had lost your sight?
It's not been that clear cut, really. What I'm finding again, it's very much dependent on the individual people and their comfortableness with disability. So I've got wonderful friends and colleagues who are just like, okay, you've lost your sight. That's awful. What can we do to help? And having people like that who acknowledge that it sucks while also still kind of treating me as a person with autonomy is, really something I've found actually is really precious. Where things have been a little bit more difficult probably is with the people who are closest to me, like my family, purely because they love me so much that it's impacted them almost as much as it's impacted me. So I'm finding that not just with family, but with a lot of people, I have to do a lot of emotional support, which I find quite bizarre in a lot of ways as the person at the centre who's affected the most. I hadn't expected that I would have to do so much work, and also with advocating for myself too.
Yeah, because you know what you can do and what can you still do that is the same as before, and what have you actually managed to adapt so that it might not be the same as you used to do it before, but it still kind of maintains who you are. And that's harder for them maybe to understand because you are the one living it.
To some extent, yes, but you've kind of hit on something that I think maybe is unique to me in kind of losing my sight, or anyone, I guess, who would have an unexpected disability as an adult, which is there's often this expectation that you know what you need. I remember kind of talking to different charities after I lost my sight to try and get, as much help as possible. And the advice is always, you know what you need, so you can then explain it to others. And that's great advice if you know what you're doing. But my sight is not a consistent thing, the remaining sight that I have left. So it depends on so many factors. Is it sunny? Is it dark? Is what I'm looking at high contrast or low contrast? What size is it? Is it in the center of my vision where I can't see anything clearly anyway? So it doesn't matter how big it is if it's too far away. And then when it actually comes to day-to-day things like baking, for example, I can still bake a cake, but it might not taste very nice because I might have got the flavorings wrong because I'm used to doing everything by sight. So it's really learning how to be visually impaired is something that I'd never really heard discussed or could find any information about. And that to me has also been a really big struggle.
Yes. Yeah, because it is about learning how to live your life in a new way. I mean, if I could see all of a sudden tomorrow, I wouldn't know what to do with it as well. So it is a whole set of skills that you need to work on. And actually knowing what you need is very difficult when you're trying to figure it out yourself.
Exactly. And particularly when it's quite an emotional thing as well. So the help that I've had has been incredible, and I'm so grateful for charities like the RNIB and Torch Trust, just for other visually impaired people like yourself. Like the conversations we've had have been so invaluable because it's just showed me that actually what I'm experiencing is something other people have experienced too, and that knowing that other people have found a way gives me a little bit of hope. And hope is a really precious thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with the world moving forward the way it is with technology, with I don't know, even with attitudes. I mean, kids nowadays, for example, are very different to kids when I was growing up, and there's a lot more acceptance there. So maybe it won't happen so much in our generation, but definitely in the generations to come. I have much more hope for people who are either born with a visual impairment or acquire one at some point.
Yeah, I hope so too. And actually, technology has been one of the best things about learning how to live with sight loss. I absolutely adore my iPhone. I can magnify things on it so I can read. I've got a built-in magnifier, which means I can, see anything if I want to, within reason. And even in work, like I've got a computer-based job, so I have a monitor that's almost as big as my TV, and a giant keyboard, and a specialist software, and all of this stuff has made my experience of using technology so much closer to what it was before. Because if I had to learn how to navigate using audio, I would really struggle, because I'm not naturally an audio learner, but also audio is linear. And with vision, you immediately see the relationships between things. So I'm really grateful that I can still, even if it takes me 10 minutes to look at a page, I can, with that extra time, figure out what things are and their relationship to each other.
I'm sorry to say that we're all out of time for today. We'll be hearing more from Ella again in 2 weeks' time, when she'll be sharing the rest of her story. Next week, we'll be airing a special episode looking towards the start of Lent and beginning our preparations for Easter, so do tune in for that. In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch about anything you heard on the show, then the number to call is 01858 438 260. That's 01858 438 260, or you can email info@torchtrust.org. We're closed over the weekend, but our lovely client services team will be back on the phone lines from 9:30 on Monday morning. Until next week, from me, Marilyn, and everyone on the Reflections team, goodbye and God bless.
You've been listening to Reflections from Torch Trust.